Over 100 feet long, armed with 40 cannon and crewed by about 150 cutthroats, Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge was one of the most formidable pirate ships of its time. Contrary to what Hollywood movies often depict on the silver screen, pirates didn't all operate large, heavily armed ships like the Queen Anne's Revenge. In fact, in the 18th century, most would have used much smaller vessels called sloops.
The big advantage of a small sloop is it was fast. Also, it didn't draw much water, so you could hide in coastal waters fairly easily. You could lose yourself, especially in the Caribbean, full of islands, along the Atlantic seaboard of America, full of a barrier of sand islands. So in those waters, they were perfect.
But as a pirate captain became more successful, he would have expanded his operation. Pirates were always on the lookout for a better ride.
Often, they wanted to trade up. They wanted to replace that with a slightly larger ship, which could carry more men, more guns, and more provisions and more plunder. They traded up their smaller ships and worked their way up until they had the big, ultimate pirate fighting ship.
And that's exactly how Blackbeard got hold of the Queen Anne's Revenge. It didn't start off with that name. It was originally a French slave ship called La Concorde, which Blackbeard captured in November 1717. Pretty soon, he'd tricked it out and turned it into the baddest ship in the Caribbean.
The Concorde was great because it was a French-built slave ship, and slave ships are designed for speed because essentially they have to transport a perishable human cargo, put in its most basic terms, from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean in the fastest possible time with as little death and disruption as possible.
The design of a slave ship wasn't motivated by a respect for the human rights or suffering of the human cargo packed below decks. It was motivated by money. A slow passage meant more deaths, and for every slave that died, it meant less profit for the ship's owner. At 104 feet in length, the three-masted, 300-ton La Concorde packed a punch. She was armed with 16 cannons, but Blackbeard wasn't satisfied. He refitted La Concorde, ripping out its superstructure to create deck space and beefed up its armament.
The claims are that it carried 40 guns, which makes it one of the most powerful warships afloat.
But the supremacy of the Queen Anne's Revenge was short-lived. After just 6 months, she hit a sandbar off Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, and sank in shallow water.